What's up, fam? Extraordinary Life with Elijah. And today is the final installment on your sons and daughters. Whoa. Your sons and daughters will prophesy, your young men will see visions, and your old men will dream dreams. This is by far the longest series that I've ever done on this channel, and I'm excited to finish it up and work through the dynamics of the individual groups and how they all interact together moving forward. Now, before we get started on that, I scanned this drawing. I've drawn this so many times, I don't even remember how many times I've drawn it. It's so much fun for me to draw it. Every time that I would draw it over the years, I would try to make it more and more precise. Got way too many things in the journal. But starting out, I think it's important for you to see this. My daughters drew this picture before I drew my graph on the other side. All of the scribblings that I do, all of these ideas, I affirm and attest that all of them are no more meaningful than my daughter's scribblings. During the time period, the interim of when Jesus comes to take us to be with him, and while we're here working on earth, I like scribbling pictures for my dad that represent my heart for him in love. The disclaimer is more for my own good than it is for yours. And it's good to be reminded that Jesus said that unless we become like little children, we will not enter into the kingdom of heaven. That being said, if you haven't seen the previous videos from the last few weeks, I really encourage you to go back and watch those. They're pretty foundational for the things that we're going to be talking through today. But if you'll remember, we went over the overview of the graphic of reproductive respiration, which is built around a triangle, that there is a middle line of a transitional period, and that before that period that there's places of translation into responsibility, and that then there's transformation into transition, so on and so forth. Gotta go back and watch those videos. But all of those elements in that graph all flow together into an overarching graphic that is very dynamic. It highlights the principles that God has shown me over these last few years and their interplay together, how they expand, how they grow and build momentum into the future. Now, we've been talking about how your sons and daughters will prophesy, your young men will see visions, your old men will dream dreams, and that those three generational groups all interact together in a dynamical system that creates momentum in a legacy of faith. Now, obviously, you're going to see the isosceles triangle that we looked at in the video where we did the overview of reproductive respiration. Now, in the past few weeks, we've been talking about how your sons and daughters will prophesy, and that how the older leaders hear the prophecies that are coming from the sons and daughters, that they create then dreams in their old age, which is a vision of the future that they will not be a part of, and that in their passing then that the young people, the leaders of the present after the older leaders die, pick up the dreams of the older generation and carry that forward as their vision in leadership in the present moment. Of all of the examples that highlight this best, that Jesus and the Father are the best example of this, that out of the Father's heart comes all things, that the Father is all in all, but that Scripture says that nothing was made that has been made aside from Jesus's powerful word. Now, I think that's so beautiful because here again is that representation of the dream of the Father being picked up as the vision of the young man, that the Father has the dream, that the Son makes it his vision and brings it into being in a context that the Father would never have participation in or direct tasting of. The Father had the dream, but Jesus tasted its reality as it flowed across his tongue in its declaration. Now, within this graphic, it unfolds in such a way that the dynamics of each expression, each iteration unfolds in such a way that it produces the next iteration of the expression of the exact same graphic that grows in a predictable way connected to the previous expression. I know that might not make a whole ton of sense, but along this line, on this outside line, like we talked about in the overview video of reproductive respiration, that this line here, that it represents the track that leadership pulls on, that the dynamics of pull and push are exerted upon in the forward momentum of moving upwards towards the zenith of a person's full life calling in God to accomplish the full good works and the destiny that God has given a specific person to accomplish. That's this line. Within this line, that if we take that line and we rotate it on an axis around this initial point down here that was B, if you remember A, B, and up here we have C. If we rotate around this point down here on the bottom of B, such that this line extends upwards to this point here, and that this is a radius along this edge, that if this line then becomes the outside and then rotates downwards to here, that this point here along this line that merges up the other way, this point now becomes the center point of the next generation's expression. And that this box around the outside here is now going to be replicated as the next iteration that's larger, that comes out along here and merges up along here, merges out to here, merges up, across, there we go. That's across there, here, here, down, up, down along this line. And that now becomes the next iteration of the next generation's expression in their good works. Now, I went ahead and drew it in advance. So this is the first generation, and that out of that then, if that opens up, that then the next expression of the next generation then is the exact same shape, but expanded outwards in such a way that it's built around the same dynamics of the previous generation. Now, flowing out of that then, we have the unfolding of then 3 generations. Now, this becomes so pivotal in that each of these areas in each of the graphics that represent specific transition points and dynamics and interactions between one generation to the next generation to the next generation all flow in such a way that creates a building momentum in a legacy of faith. The first circle is the first generation, but that within that expression of leadership, that along this line, which is the transitional line of the next generation, that if we draw a radius along this portion, which is the zenith life's accomplishment of generation 1, that if you rotate around this beginning point B, that as you rotate along that in an arc, that it lines up, the trajectory of that is now the transition point of the next generation. And so what that releases is that as a father generation, as the grandmothers, the old men and women of the faith, as they faithfully discharge the full expression of their life's destiny in God, you'll see that that point is just above, just beyond the transition point of the next generation. And so a grandparent's faithfulness to push through their transition point, to gain momentum to that point, to go weightless, to be pulling in, controlling everything, and then to just let go of the wheel and push out into the next generation, to take that risk across their own transitional point, that when it merges up into this context of this upper realm where they're in now a season of pushing out the next generation, the young men and women, that they're pushing all of their authority into the next generation so that they can feel the weight of authority's approval behind them, that as that faithfulness in their transition point then is carried into the next expression of the last portion of their ministry in a pushing out, and they zenith out. They hit all the way to the top, up at the point C, like we talked about in the overview, that establishes a point along this line of continuing momentum upwards, that it's all the same line, that the same line from here to here, that is the line of faithfulness that a grandparent generation is responsible for, that they zenith out up at this point here, but that they establish a testimony that point, if their highest point, is above the transition point of the next generation, that there's always risk involved in the transitional point. And the transitional point of the next generation of the young men in leadership is not the same as the transitional point and the risks of their grandparent generation. It's greater. There's a more intense expression of faith, but the fullness of faith expressed in the grandparent generation establishes a testimony that is just beyond the transitional point of the young men, the young women who take up the dream of the grandparents as their vision. Now, the awesome part about this is, oh, my face is cramping so bad, that while the faithfulness of a grandparent generation, that while their zenith of accomplishment establishes then the foundation of the expression of the next generation's central hexagon. Now, that's a whole nother conversation. But while it establishes that, imparts a testimony of breakthrough to the young men in their point of transition, I'm gonna have to erase some of this line right here. Oh man, there's too much scribbling. Erase. That while it comes up to create the trajectory of the outside of the foundational elements of the next generation, and it gives a testimony of breakthrough for the young men in their transition point, that the zenith perfectly correlates to the central values of the next generation 3 generations in advance, when the sons and daughters are in a place of leadership. Now, guys, that is beyond crazily awesome. That now, with that in place, leadership can establish dreams and prophetic insight 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 7, 10, 100 years into the future. And they can literally place the point, this called the central values of generations to the future, without having any idea where that lands. That here is 1, 2, 3, 4th generation, but that as we understand those principles, then, that we know that this outside edge is continuing on up, that it goes on this line and continues on up, that point B, that this point that of Jesus, who is the cornerstone from which everything comes from, and that he runs along the foundation, who is Christ, that every person starts at this place and has to be transformed into the image of Christ. Butterflies do not give birth to butterflies, they give birth to caterpillars. That every generation has to begin in this place, the centrality reality of Christ and be transformed in a foundational element of character with him. You can't impart character. It has to be built. And out of all of these functions and dynamics that we can look and say, okay, so we know that this is the line of destiny that's moving upwards this way, and that this is going to rotate outwards here, that this is going to rotate outwards here, that the top of this generation comes out to define the central point of the next generation, which is going to be here, and that this moves on out to here, and this moves on up here, and that even though we can't see the rest of the graph, that the expression of the generations start becoming so big that they don't fit on the map of our awareness. But that the beauty of it is the things that were the absolute zenith of the accomplishment of the sons and daughters, when they merge into your sons and daughters prophesy, your young men see visions, your old men dream dreams, that by the time that the sons and daughters are in a place of leadership and they express the fullness of faith with God, that the zenith of their accomplishment is flowing out of central values that correlated to the highest achievement of the faithfulness of their grandparent generation. That the things that the grandparent generation could only dream as being possible, that they longed to see it one time in their lifetime before that they died, but that in their faith's fullness, in a momentum of legacy in faithfulness, that the zenith of the grandparent generation becomes the central values. Everything rotates around that, such that it's just common. Well, of course we raise people from the dead. Why are you surprised about that? Why is he surprised? But that out of that faithfulness and the momentum of a legacy of faith, that then the sons and daughters now become grandparents, that their zenith of accomplishment then becomes the expression of the central values 3 iterations to the future. And that even though they don't know how that's possible, it's far beyond anything they can ask, think, or imagine, but that in the abundance of God's goodness and out of the faithfulness of the Father, that they pray with more momentum in having seen this become the central value of their generation, and that this becomes this generation, and that then this over here, we don't even know where it's at, but we can sketch it in. We can know this is the central value, even though it's hovering off in the middle of nowhere. There's no lines or dots there, but because I have the reasoning of faith, and that there is a consistent momentum in faith's fullness, that I can know that is the center right there. I can call for it. I can talk about it. I can establish it within my children's hearts and minds as a dream, even though I have no capacity for seeing that. It's invisible. And that's called faith. Faith is the confident hope of things not seen. Oh man, this one's getting long. Whew, we're gonna end it out. We have sons and daughters, we have young men, we have old men. As old men humble themselves to take up the prophecies of sons and daughters as the basis of their dreams, they become an example for the young men that humility, humbling yourself, and becoming a servant of all becomes the example. And when young men, mothers and fathers, see grandmothers and grandfathers humbling themselves to pull the prophetic insights of their grandchildren into the limelight of establishing dreams, sons and daughters learn the exact same behavior. So that when then the old men and women begin to merge to the end of their life, such that then they pass away, and the young men come into a place of leadership, such that they are the old men and women, that they take then the sons and daughters who merge into the young men, and that they draw them along, and that they merge up into a place where they are providing the prophetic insight for the old men and women of the next generation, and that they lower themselves, and that then they say, well, we will going to lower ourselves too, and that we're going to lower ourselves too. That as this process then matures and takes over, that we begin to see a growing legacy that is expressed in the exact same place where we started so long ago, with an unfolding DNA that merges out throughout all time, such that God has an unending river of faithfulness, of ministers who minister before him always in an uninterrupted flow of heaven's coming into the earth. Now, fam, that was a big one. I have no idea where this is going to end up as far as length of time. Hopefully that was clear to you. If you would like to know more about it, if you'd like to sit down and talk with me about how the Father and his Son and Holy Spirit have represented their image and likeness in mankind, man and woman, bonded in covenant unity, to express the representation of Father and Son bonded together in unity by the Spirit, and how we can live that out intentionally together in covenant community. I would love nothing more than to sit down with you and talk to you about that. If you subscribe to what I am doing, then hit the button, hit it, and then get it. Hit the bell as well so you get notified with the new content. And if you loved this video, you didn't just like it, hit the thumbs down button. I pray blessings on your day. I love you guys lots, and I will see you in the next video.